First tonight, medical staff contributed to the death of a 6-year-old boy after they failed to identify the signs and symptoms of deadly meningitis.
Ollie Hall from Suffolk died at James Paget Hospital in October 2017, just hours after being assessed by a trainee doctor and a senior GP. Today, a jury at an inquest concluded medics were at fault for not diagnosing him and providing basic medical care, and that a faster diagnosis could have saved his life.
Our reporter has been at the inquest for us today. Russell.
Well, yes, this is every parent's worst nightmare, isn't it? Your child goes to bed fit and healthy, wakes up the next morning complaining of feeling particularly poorly, and you need to understand exactly what's wrong with them. So you book a doctor's appointment, place your trust in the hands of medical professionals, and yet get told that he or she has nothing to worry about. And that's just what happened in this case, sadly, with tragic consequences.
The owl and the pussycat went to sleep.
Oliver Hall from Halesworth in Suffolk was a happy, healthy 6-year-old. His mum and dad, Georgie and Brian, could never have imagined that just a few hours after developing a temperature and rash, he'd be dead. Even though an NHS 111 operator had concerns that Ollie might have sepsis, an ambulance crew and GPs at the family's local surgery had decided he didn't need to go to hospital.
I phoned my mum when I got back from the GP surgery after we'd been sent home, and I just said, "Mum, I'm sure he's got something like meningitis, but they've told me it's not. I don't need to worry about it." And I feel really silly. I feel like I've kind of, maybe I've wasted their time. I don't know. We kind of started to question it, didn't we?
By the evening, Ollie had got worse. A GP did then decide he was seriously ill and gave him an injection of penicillin. Another ambulance was called, but the doctor wasn't told by controllers there were none available, which caused a further delay, before Ollie's mum and dad ended up driving him to the James Paget in Galston themselves. Sadly, it was too late. Ollie was in the advanced stages of meningococcal septicemia, and all interventions failed. He suffered a cardiac arrest overnight. The inquest heard that had Ollie been diagnosed earlier, by 3:30 on the day of his illness, it's likely he would have survived. After 4 days of hearing evidence, the jury reached its conclusion today, finding that Oliver died of natural causes contributed to by neglect, namely a gross failure to provide basic medical treatment, a failure to communicate, and a failure to carry out enough or appropriate observations and examinations.
It's huge, and we've always felt the outcome that we got today should be the outcome that we got today.
The Ipswich and Suffolk coroner, Nigel Parsley, has said he'll be making recommendations to all the organisations involved in treating Oliver to ensure lessons are learned and procedures improved. Russell Hookey, ITV News, Ipswich.
It's just tragic, Russell. What has been the reaction following the inquest's conclusion?
Well, yes, as you saw there, the conclusion of the jury at the inquest was particularly damning of the healthcare that Oliver received. And this evening we've heard from the East of England Ambulance Trust, which says it's carrying out an internal investigation following the points that were raised during that inquest. We've also heard from the Great Yarmouth and Waveney Clinical Commissioning Group. Now, that's the body responsible for the local doctor's surgery in Halesworth that the family used. It says it's trying to understand just what went wrong and to minimise the chances of it occurring again in the future. It says it will be working with other agencies and organisations to make changes to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
Well, let's get more on this tragic story now from Dr. Tom Nutt, who's the CEO of the charity Meningitis Now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening, Doctor. How do you react then to such damning findings that so many parts of the health system failed young Ollie Hall?
Well, I think this is an incredibly sad and tragic case, and our thoughts this evening are with the parents, Georgie and Brian. Clearly, there's going to be lessons need to be learned here. I think we have to do everything we can to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again.
And sadly, we hear it so many times when it's attached to meningitis that lessons have to be learned. At what point do lessons stop being learned and actual actions are put into place, systems are put in place to stop this happening, do you think?
Well, I think what we do have to remember is that meningitis can be a really difficult disease to spot. You know, we know from many cases we look at that it doesn't get picked up by healthcare professionals in the first instance, and that's because the symptoms and signs when they first emerge are often non-specific. But what we often find at Meningitis Now, and I think it's been the case here with the Hall family, is that very often parents do know their children best, and parents will know when their child is ill and abnormally ill. And I think one of the key lessons to learn from this case is that the healthcare professionals need to listen and take seriously what parents have to say.
Yeah, and that really is a very good point, Doctor, because, as I say, just repeating some of those points there, gross failure to supply basic medical treatment, failure to communicate, failure to carry out full examinations, and failure to carry out proper observations. This isn't something really, in some respects, it goes with diagnosis, it goes with massive failings of the system.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right, and I'll say again, I mean, it's a terribly sad case. But when patients are sick and deteriorating, it almost doesn't matter what the condition is. There will be signs and symptoms that indicate that urgent treatment is needed. And I think what we're learning from this inquest is that needed to take effect sooner than it did in this case. So it's terribly sad for Georgie and Brian, the parents.
And finally, are we learning any more about meningitis at this stage, and your prognosis for the future going forward?
Well, I think we have to remember that meningitis, thankfully, is a preventable disease. So there are vaccines that are available that can prevent some of the causes of meningitis. So that's great news. But many of us, little Ollie in this case, won't have had a vaccine that might have saved their lives. So it's really important that people do know the signs and symptoms. Do be prepared to act quickly, trust your instincts, if you like, in these situations, and get urgent medical help. And hopefully we know that when that happens and when the system works well, then outcomes are improved and lives can be saved.
Dr. Tom Nutt, we really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.